Boatbuilding News, the podcast. Let's do it. Welcome to Boatbuilding News, the podcast, a series of engaging interviews with key individuals from within the marine industry. I'm excited. This is going to be epic. Who knew the coatings industry was so interesting? George's knowledge and passion shines through in this episode. Have a listen. Welcome, George, to the Boatbuilding News.
Hi, Holly. Thank you for
How you doing?
me to be here. I'm okay. Yeah, it's been a pretty busy week, but so far so good.
Okay, first of all, I'm going to start with an admission and an apology. So when you first contacted me, you sent me over a message and said, you'd been listening to the Boatbuilding News and you were interested about coming on the podcast and having a chat about it. So my initial reaction, and I'm gonna be quite honest about it. I thought, I don't know if that would be interesting. That's exactly what I thought. And you know what? We had this conversation, we had the initial chat, and I met you for the first time. And within a minute, probably even less, you got me. The passion you have for your industry is so infectious, and it is so much more interesting than I'd given it credit for. So I am so excited to share this with everyone.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, to be honest, the reason I contacted you initially was because I've been watching some of your videos and I've been listening to the podcast since we've been in contact. And the passion is definitely reciprocated because I thought that you were very passionate how you spoke about your industry and how you approach certain subjects. And I like that. And I bounced off that. So I thought I've got to be, get in touch with Holly and have a chat with her. So yeah, thank you for having me and thank you for, having this chat.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. So introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and your role you play in the industry.
Okay. So, George, and I live in Hamburg, Germany currently, but obviously originally British, from London originally, but I've lived in Germany kind of half my life. And ever since I graduated from university, which had nothing to do with boat building, to be honest, I studied business and economics at uni. I fell into the boat building industry pretty much straight afterwards, which was, happened to be in Hamburg. I got an internship in Hamburg with a marketing company, and then after that, I fell quite quickly into working for a company who was based in Balmforth, which is a big boat building and vessel building yards here in Germany. It's a traditional yard. It's very well known worldwide. It now belongs to the Lürsen Group. And so that's where my career started. And that's where I walked on to my first new build yacht, which happened to be an extremely large privately owned vessel, which was, my first kind of experience of walking onto a yacht, which was a ghost at that point. It was a shell made out of aluminium and steel. So it blew my mind, and I got sucked into this industry very quickly, and just thought, this is me. I grew the passion very quickly, and a connection to this industry within a matter of months doing my first job there. I've been based in Germany almost half my life. Bit of a stint in Spain. I lived in Spain for 4 years, working for MB92 in Barcelona.
Oh wow!
But again, it was mostly to do with yacht new builds and yacht refits. But currently I work for a company called Jotun, who is a Norwegian coatings manufacturer. We're a global company, but HQ'd just about an hour and a half south of Oslo in a town called Sandefjord. We've got 10,000 employees, and, we've got a global presence. We've got offices in a lot of countries around the world. And very focused across segments. So it's not just marine, but we've got decorative, industrial, marine and yachting, which are the main segments that we focus on as a company. So I've worked for them now for about 5 years. And my current position is sales manager for yards, applicators and EPCs. Awesome.
So how important, and this is something that really I didn't give enough credit to until we actually spoke. How important is the coating industry to the wider marine industry?
So the coating industry is, mostly renowned for anti-corrosion. So obviously you've got to protect steel and aluminium and a lot of other surfaces, if you're taking that into consideration, against the elements, against weathering. It's got to be protected against the everyday causes of corrosion initially, whether you're talking about tanks, exterior substrates, whether you're talking about superstructures or hulls, you have to give protection to steel. And this usually comes from an initial steel primer after the surface has been prepared, whether it's through grinding or sandblasting or whichever kind of surface preparation and treatment has been carried out. You then apply an initial steel primer, right? And that protects it against the elements, which avoids corrosion, it avoids breakdown of the substrate, and it keeps it basically healthy, if you want to put it like that, over the life span of that vessel, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it may be. And this applies across the industries. It's not just marine. It applies across the full spectrum of industries, whether it's industry, marine, yachting, wherever you're focused on. And then obviously when it comes to the yachting industry in particular, it becomes a lot more sexy, if you want to put it that way. You're not just talking about
everything does when it goes into the yachting industry.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, you're then talking about filling and fairing of surfaces, which is, kind of forming the shape of a yacht through very skilled expertise of the guys who are applying this stuff. It's usually an epoxy-based system, which you can form through, hand and manual labor, and then sanding, which then goes on to the primers and then what we call top coats. So the top coating is usually polyester and acrylic, polyurethane-based coatings, which are these high gloss top coats, which is, the first thing you see when you look at a yacht, whether it's a 20 meter or whether it's 160 meter, the first thing you notice is the gloss coming off that surface, glowing in the sun. It
catches your eye, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, whether it's, in Fort Lauderdale, whether it's in Monaco, the first thing you're going to see is, wow, look at the gloss coming off that black or that white or whichever color it might be. And that's when it gets really interesting. And that's what made me fall in love with yachting, to be honest, was that side of it.
Oh, really? So you quite like the sort of the end coating, the aesthetic part?
Yeah, I tell you why. It's because when you first walk onto a vessel, regardless of what it's made out of, whether it's steel or whether it's aluminium or could be GLP, you're involved from the beginning of that project, you can see all the different layers building up to the end goal. And the end goal is to provide a perfect finish of that vessel, and to make it look as good as possible and to meet, the owner's expectations. Because at the end of the day, what we do here is we build vessels and we try to make it look as good as possible for the owner. The yard's involved, the owner's representatives are involved, the applicators involved. There's huge amounts of different parties involved throughout the build, the ongoing build and the different levels. But at the end of the day, the end goal is to, give that owner the owner's finish that they expect. So that when they walk onto that vessel, they're saying, wow, this is what I paid all this money for and what I, invested all this time into. This is what I expected and what I'd hoped for. So it's the build up to that end result, really. That's, really what I like to be part of.
Yeah, sure. So coatings is imperative right through the whole build process then. It's not something you just come in at the end and make it look all lovely and shiny and beautiful. It's scientifically thought out and, it's quite technical right from the beginning part of the build process right up until the end product then.
Absolutely. When we first get involved in a project, the first thing that we have to do is obviously we do a risk assessment. We look from a Jotun point of view, or if you're an applicator from the application point of view, where are my risks? How are we going to approach this project, and what technical specification do we need to put down on the table? So from a Jotun perspective, once we've assessed the project at hand, and if we're happy to go ahead with it, we will then enter all the necessary details into our CRM system. And then from that stage forward, we're building a technical specification. The technical specification goes backwards and forwards between the different stakeholders, between the different parties. There's feedback, there's comments. I don't like this, I would like more of that. So we have to know the expectations from the owner's side and from the yard side from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. Our customer is important to point out at this stage, especially industry where I work in, is the applicator. Sometimes it's the yard, but it's very rarely going to be the end customer themselves. Obviously, you have the yard in between the owner's representatives and the applicators. And so we send them the technical specification of how that expected system is going to be built up, in which steps, and using which products. And this goes for the whole vessel, whether it's the interiors, whether it's the tanks, whether it's the exterior superstructures and hulls. You have to have a technical specification, giving the different steps and the different products and the different limitations of those products according to the climatic conditions, if you like, on how that's going to be applied and how you're going to achieve the end goal.
So, I've never also thought about it that about how your end customer isn't the actual person purchasing the boat. I've never actually thought about how important it is for you to identify who you're actually selling your product to as well. There's so much more to this industry than first meets the eye. And I think that this education piece, could help with actually attracting people into the industry, because if people actually really, really understood what goes on and actually really, really understood how much there is to the coatings industry, you could tap into a whole entire pool of talent. So it's definitely, I think, an education piece, isn't it? I mean, for myself, even being in the marine industry and the yachting industry, it's not that I hadn't, I didn't appreciate, the coatings part of it. I just hadn't stopped to think about it and how important it was throughout the whole build process. You stereotypically think of the engineers, the fit up carpenters, the laminators, the designers, the architects and everything like that. But I had never stopped to think about the people who were involved in the application of the coatings.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Holly. And that's something I hear on a quite regular basis, to be honest, especially when we deal with engineers or designers who are building the vessels but don't necessarily appreciate or have an in-depth knowledge of coatings. A lot of people work in this industry for years without really thinking too much about it because it's just something that happens in the background. However,
it just quietly happens, doesn't it? No one seems to get excited about coatings until I met you.
Apart from us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, I think, on the level of or the length of build and the size. I mean, if you're building some of the big vessels, which is our main focus point in Germany, certainly in Northern Europe, in Germany and Holland, sometimes in France, you're building these big vessels, kind of 60, 70, 80 meter plus. And in Germany, certainly, we've got one of the biggest shipyards here called Lürssen, which are focusing more or less on 100 meter plus niche market. And I don't know if you've actually been made aware recently, but there's another big shipyard in Germany called Meyer Yard. Yeah. And they've certainly started to divest their product portfolio in a major way. They're looking at floating infrastructure. They're looking at different ways and means of building these huge cruise liners that they've focused on for, a huge amount of time.
Yeah, were they involved in the the Icon of the Seas? I think they were involved with, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they're involved with all the big cruise line owners. So they are working for Disney, they're working for P&O, they work for Royal Caribbean. They build some of the biggest cruise liners in the world. Yeah. But now, I mean, my point was they're diversifying and they've taken an interest in the yacht market. And their market is actually the 150 meter plus. So they're diversifying into a completely different level of yachting, which has only been built, a few times around the world at this point. And for them, the coatings part of the project is massive because it implements every single other part of the build of that vessel, because coatings need tenting, it needs heating, it needs humidity, it needs serious climatic control. And what does that mean as an impact for the overall build? Well, you have to build scaffolding, you have to build tenting, you have to make sure that all this equipment is in place to control those climatic conditions so that we're achieving the acceptance criteria, which is usually made to the highest possible standards in the shipbuilding industry, certainly in the yachting industry. And in order to do so, the yard have to allow planning for this. They have to allow coatings engineers to be involved with the applicator, with the owner's representatives, with people like us as the manufacturer of the coatings. So for them, it's a massive part because it plays such a role in the overall aesthetical finish of these vessels. So they want to get it right. And if they don't get it right, it can lead to, delays, unfortunate circumstances such as claims. So it's something that is still a major role, regardless of whether it happens in the background. The people who are directly involved with it at this level, really have to take it seriously.
Well, yes, because I mean, what you've just described, the logistical sort of organisational part of it to control those conditions so that it can be applied properly, that has major impacts on the build and has to be project managed properly, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, when I first started my career, I was a junior project manager, and then I moved later on to be a senior project manager at applicator level. So I worked for applicators for about 11 years before I switched to manufacturing. And it was to the T. You had to make sure you're getting all your I's dotted and all your T's crossed with regards to the schedule. We were building schedules for months sometimes for these new builds. And all these schedules had to then go through different levels of management on all the levels of the stakeholders to be agreed. Because as you said, Holly, it impacts everything else around the different things that go into building a vessel. So the engineers have to kind of skirt around the applicators because their tent might be blocking off certain areas where they have to get in and install fittings. The teak guys can't get in until the steel has been protected and potentially fed or leveled underneath the teak. So they're always coming in after the applicators have done their job. So if the applicator is delayed, it's going to have substantial knock-on effects with regards to the rest of the build. So absolutely, I mean, this is something that has to be scheduled, it has to be planned, it has to be timed, and it has to have guys with serious levels of knowledge doing this and controlling it from the beginning on, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble quickly.
Yeah, completely. So how competitive? How much of a big player is Jotun, and how competitive is this industry?
So Jotun's been around for a long time. I mean, we've been around as a major player, certainly in the commercial marine industry, for a substantial amount of years. We're still a privately owned company. We're still owned by the same family that's owned us since the very beginning, obviously through different generations. But the competitiveness is extreme, obviously, especially in Northern Europe, and Southern Europe is exactly the same. It's mostly the same names that you see across the segments, whether it's yachting or commercial marine. The competition is rife. It's, the big names that you've seen throughout the industry, obviously the internationals, the Akzo Nobels, the DuPonts, the Hempels, the Mankiewicz's. These guys are the big names in the coating industries. And Jotun is, certainly a market leader with regard to commercial marine. We've been market leader for a long time. And yachting is something that we started in quite late with regards to a competition. So, we've been a big player in the yacht industry, I'd say, for about 15 years now, whereas our competition has been in it for 30 years, some of the companies. So, to a large extent, we may be market leader in commercial marine, but in yachting, we're still, to some extent, the new kid on the block. We're getting
even
more and more
15 years
traction.
on.
Even 15 years on, because what I had to learn quickly, especially as a sales manager, is patience is a virtue in this industry. You have to build references, you have to build trust, you have to build relationships. The yards and the applicators and certainly the owners teams have to understand, okay, so what does Jotun have to offer that I can't get from my competitors? And how can you prove this to me? And the only way you can really prove it to them, apart from references on paper, is through building a vessel with them. And then 5 years down the line, they're saying, great, I've got a much better performance through your coating system than I would have done if I'd gone with one of your competitors. And usually that's being judged on a boat or a yacht or whatever it may be that they've built with a competitor's product. That's from the owner's side, but certainly
and that
from
takes
the
a while, doesn't it? To go through that process with somebody is not something you do in 2 weeks. Do you know what I mean? That takes a while to build up. So I guess that when you said your new kids on the block 15 years in, that sounds crazy. But when you think about the process of a new client realizing that, obviously they realize that having a coatings company adds value, but do they realize the value that Jotun in particular as a specific coatings company to realize that value that you guys add can, I presume that could take months, years even.
Oh, you're definitely talking about years, because if you think about the vessels that we build in Germany, it's a 3 year build time for the bigger yachts, for the 80 meter, the 100 meter pluses. So, and there's only a certain amount of slots each yard can give to their businesses, right? So if they're building 5 80 meter vessels or 3 100 meter vessels, and they're building it with your competitors, you're not going to get in that yard necessarily, potentially for 2 to 3 years until the next opportunity arises. And you're bidding for these projects sometimes 2 years before build start. So you're talking to them constantly, trying to get their updated pipelines, trying to see what they can, or where you could get a foot in the door with. Maybe it's not going to be the full vessel, but maybe it's going to be tanks, maybe it's going to be interiors. And I think, your opportunity will come if you're on the ball, if you're in touch with the right people, if you're showing presence, if you're constantly knocking on that door. And it's the same principle that applies across all industries. The fundamental thing that I've learned about sales, and certainly sales management when you're running a team, is be there, show presence, show interest, and listen. You need to ask the right questions. You need to see what they're struggling with, where are their challenges, and how can you help them with that? It might not necessarily be meaning selling a single liter of paint for 3 years. But if you're in there, if you're having the right conversations and you're listening, you're understanding, that's gonna certainly open up doors for you. It might not be tomorrow, but it could be in 6 months' time or a year's time, where they're saying, listen, I'm struggling with your competitors. Can you give me a solution here? What can you do for me? And that's when you've got to move. That's when you've got to move in and attack, and really move in for the kill.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? You have to understand that you're not selling coatings, you're not selling paint, you're selling a solution to their problem. You know what I mean? And that's what you need to focus on, I guess. It's not a product necessarily you're selling. It's an answer to their question.
Absolutely. You've knocked it on the head, really, because if you were just selling paint and you could lean back and say, okay, my job's done now, that would be the ideal, world. But that's not what we do. That's not what we want to do. And that's not who we are. Certainly Jotun are very well known for their technical support. One of our major USPs is being there with the customers from the beginning, and certainly after the yards, the yards launched the vessel and handed it over to the end clients. We're still in the picture. We're still being in contact with the captains or the owners' reps or whoever it might be that was not necessarily our direct customer during the build phase, but we're contacting the yard, and certainly the vessel after it's been launched through the entire span of the vessel's life cycle. We want to be there, certainly in touch for the coming dry dockings, for the coming refits. Could be 2-3 years down the line, but we stay there as a support network. And, during the build, the yards definitely, absolutely, if they've given you the opportunity to use your coating systems on their vessels, they want to see not only that you're delivering the paint on time, but you're supporting with the application of that system, and you're giving them best practice methods. And that's certainly something, Jotun have proved themselves to be very good with over the years. Even before I was even involved with the company, on a sales level, I was their customer. So I was buying Jotun products as an applicator. When I was, project manager in Germany, in Spain, we were dealing with Jotun, and something that made me attracted to the company was the fact that, they're always going to pick up their phones and they're always going to be there the next day if you ask them to be. And that can't be said for some of our competitors.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Even if somebody, I guess, if I relate that to recruitment, even if my candidate doesn't get the job, what's important to me, of course it's important to me that they get a job, but if they don't, the candidate experience they've had with us, even if it wasn't a positive outcome, has the experience been positive? And that you need to kind of separate that from the result sometimes of the sale, and think, has their experience been good? And if you're offering not just the product but also the service as well, it's an all-round service you're offering, isn't it?
Yeah, it has to be. Otherwise, you're not going to get very far, especially in this industry. As we were just saying,
people won't come back to you, will they?
Well, yeah, they won't. They just won't. I mean, if you are not delivering an all-round package, if you like, a turnkey solution to that particular challenge that they've had in the past, then they're saying, well, why change at all? I'll stick to the guys I know and have relationships to, and I'll deal with the problems if and when they come. So you need to go in there with your feet running. basically, and help them
Yeah,
from the very
absolutely.
beginning.
So, what challenges are you facing at the moment?
Obviously, it's been an interesting 2 or 3 years,
Doesn't
as
it just?
everyone's been aware. I think since 2019, things changed dramatically. They made big companies, as well as small companies, as well as individuals, question their best practice methods of doing business. And especially with Jotun, as we're a global company, there's a lot of expected of us. And certainly through the pandemic, 2020, 2021 was an interesting one to say the least. The challenges we faced were obviously stemming from raw materials. The raw material indexes were going through the roof. I'll give you an example. From 2021, from 2020 actually through 2021, we have what we call a Biama index, and these are coatings indexes which are showing you the raw material costs of the products or the chemicals that we use in our coating systems, in our coating products. So epoxy is a massive one for us. And within a year that had increased over 120%. So the raw material cost of epoxy had increased by 120%. So obviously, as a big company, we're able to absorb some of these raw material costs, but then we were having to pass a certain amount on to our customers. Our customer bases were facing their own problems, but then they were facing, these increased product costs from not only the coatings industries, but they were, looking at different products across the board: steel, fuel, teak, certainly. These major aspects that these big yards and these big applicators need to get these vessels built, and they carried on building throughout the pandemic. The yachting industry wasn't massively affected, certainly in Northern Europe, but they were having to deal with these massively spiked and certainly elevated price increases from the manufacturer side. And what was that doing? It was leading to discussions on a constant level. You were constantly having to renegotiate prices. We were facing the internal problem of getting these products made, produced, and delivered on times, because it wasn't only affecting the raw materials, but it was affecting the cost of transport. So our entire logistics network was affected. Then when it came to the war that broke out in Ukraine early this year, we were facing a new set onslaught of, silly things that you don't really consider to be an aspect, but is obviously a major player in transport. Things like drivers with the certification to drive dangerous goods from A to B were no longer there, because they came from certain backgrounds or countries. And obviously Brexit, we had a similar situation when Brexit happened, because one of our major factories is based in Flixborough, near Scunthorpe in the UK. And all of a sudden they had to deal with Brexit. So it's been just one thing after another for the big manufacturers and for anyone involved in the industry. It's been a struggle for business over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and then I guess, with your role in the sales side of things, you're sometimes drawing the short straw, because, it sometimes falls to the sales department. Well, usually falls to the sales department, like you say, to renegotiate those terms. When it does come to inevitably having to pass on those costs to your customer, it falls at your door to be able to draw on those relationships that you've built with these guys and to be able to negotiate that.
Definitely. And it was challenging. I learned a lot. Let's put it that way. I've been in this industry 15 years now, and I'm still learning every single day. Whether it's a similar challenge, but under different conditions or different circumstances, I love to learn. I love to better myself. I am my own biggest critic. And I think unless you have a certain attitude, you're gonna stumble at the first hurdle a lot of the time, because if you don't do it, and if you're not picking up that phone, and if you're not bettering yourself, I can guarantee that your competition will do. So, if you're not bettering yourself on a consistent basis, someone else will, and someone else is then going to potentially win business that you could have, swept up. So, it's not only about negotiation, but I would say it's about learning, taking those learnings with you into your next projects or into your next meeting. It could be, next week you've got a meeting, you're learning something through a particular challenge or circumstance now, and you've got to take that with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that obviously the COVID was a struggle and everything like that. But like you say, everyone across every industry learned so much from that. And if we hit another, unexpected or unexplained or, unprecedented crisis again, we will have learnt skills from those COVID years that we'll be able to draw on, that we wouldn't have. We wouldn't have those tools in our armory if we hadn't gone through these tough times.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you another quick example. I mean, obviously contracts, we have big key accounts who are on contracts, and we have to renew these contracts every usually annually, because it gives them the conditions, it gives them the prices, and it gives them, more or less what they can expect from us and what we can expect from them. And they then became null and void pretty much, overnight when this COVID hit, because they had to be completely rewritten in some cases, completely renegotiated. And it was a big challenge, because the customers were saying, listen, we can't help, force majeure, it's a pandemic, et cetera, and you've got to kind of try and work around that challenge and find a way to keep them happy, to keep your products coming, but also to make sure that your bottom line isn't suffering too much.
Yeah, it's tough, because with everything, it's a balancing act, isn't it, though?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, so, absolutely. I mean, your industry, with technology and everything like that, and everything that the industry's learning, it's constantly evolving. But do you have that one end goal professionally in mind, or are you just evolving yourself, as the industry's evolving?
I think a bit of both. Obviously, everyone's got a certain amount of ambition. They know where they want to be in 5 or 10 years' time. I've certainly, always pushed myself from the very beginning. I'm now in a position where I'm still learning, but I feel established in the industry. A lot of, I've built up quite a substantial network of people who I love to work with, and my personal brand is certainly out there in the industry. I think people like working with me. They know what to expect, and they know that they can challenge me at any turn, and I will adapt myself as much as I can, but I'll still try and deliver. I think this was installed in me, from a young age. Keep pushing, keep learning, keep challenging yourself, and certainly
you're so driven.
Yeah, you have to be. I mean, you need to take that criticism on the chin and learn from it. You cannot let yourself get too down. You have to just say, right, okay, that happened. I have to learn from this, and I have to make sure that A, this doesn't happen again, and B, how can we better ourselves? And I don't just think it's me, Holly. I think it's, Jotun is certainly a great example of a company who takes that and installs that into all their employees. It's a culture, it's a synergy, and it's something that we're taught, to believe in from the very beginning. We have what we call the 4 values in Jotun. I think each one of those values plays a role in how we do our everyday business.
Yeah, but I mean, also though, especially working in sales, who you are matters, because, you mentioned personal brand, and people buy from people, and Jotun can have the best reputation ever and can offer the greatest service and, like you say, have the greatest values as a company. But ultimately, people buy from people. And that's why I think that your, the passion you have for your industry shines through. You're not just another salesperson representing Jotun. Do you know what I mean? You've kind of really niched down on what you specialize in. You've become an expert in your space, and you've developed this personal brand which complements Jotun. And that's the best way, I think, because people aren't buying from Jotun, they're buying from George.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've summed that up well. And I'm sure that you can relate to this, Holly, because I think people do buy from people, and I can feel it myself. If I like someone, I'm more inclined to do business with them. I'm more inclined to pick up the phone to them first and say, listen, there's an opportunity around the corner. Do you want to sit down and, potentially discuss doing business together? However, that is only going to take you a certain amount of the way. If you then can't start delivering on those initial discussions, people are pretty quickly going to say, listen, it's not working out. I'm going to start branching out. And that's what you need to make sure, that in those initial discussions, when they've picked up the phone to you, they're going to get what they hopefully have thought they're going to get by doing business with you. It's not always going to happen, and you can't always deliver on promises because of various things. But if you can't deliver on a certain promise, certainly find a way around it, and find a different way, which is still going to work out in their best interest at the end. Because you have to remember 2 things. Brand image of the company is one thing, but if you somehow manage to burn bridges with your network, that's going to have a massive influence on your personal brand. And as you said, if people don't want to do business with you, it doesn't matter who you work for. You could work for the biggest company in the world, but they're not going to take your calls, and they're not going to answer your emails when you're looking for business with them.
100%. I mean, you've got to protect you have to hold your reputation in the highest regard, because you take that with you throughout your whole professional career. And I think that there's an element of, people buy from people, people talking the talk. You've got to walk the walk as well.
Yeah.
But if you can't walk the walk for whatever reason, but you've communicated why you can't, and you've been honest and transparent, and you've worked with them to find a solution, then, no one's expecting the perfect sales cycle. As long as you've got that consultative approach and you're supportive and you're just still taking them to that end destination they want to, it just might be a different path, then, I think that's probably the ultimate aim, isn't it?
I think in the coatings industry, you have to have, or let me put it this way, it's very beneficial as a sales manager of a segment if you have technical knowledge to back up, as you said, when you're talking the talk. And I've been very lucky in that respect, because I was on the scaffolding for 11 years running teams of applicators. I've been able to transfer that technical knowledge, what I learned, every day with these guys, crawling through tanks, applying all different kinds of products, then bring it over into the sales discussions. And if people can see an underlying level of knowledge shining through your negotiations on sales and prices, and they're thinking, well, this guy, I'm taking him seriously. He knows what he's talking about. And I know that when I'm doing business with people, it's going to go a long way, and it's going to be beneficial to you.
Yeah, completely agree. I couldn't agree more. So do you have a one moment sort of professionally in your career, either with Jotun or previously, that's been really stand out for you, where you look back and you think, I'm so proud of what I achieved there?
Yeah, I think, two standout moments for me would be when I was a younger project manager and we delivered on, the first big vessel I ever built. I walked on the vessel when it was still, skeleton essentially. And then the moment it kind of came out of the build shed and it was delivered to the shipyard, not necessarily to the first owner, but the minute we came at, it'd been in the yard, in the shed for about 3.5 years. And it finally came out. And, the pride on everyone's face is not just mine. And this is going back when, how old would I have been? Probably in my kind of late 20s. And you're like, wow, I built this. I was part of this. I worked every single day, 10, 12-hour days to achieve this. And I put my heart and soul into it. And, you're only one guy in a team of thousands of people who've built that vessel, but nonetheless, you're there, you're looking at the end product and the fruit of your labors essentially. And it was quite similar to a project that we've done recently in Germany. We did a big refit of a 120 meter plus vessel. We fully recoated it with a Jotun system. And, there was a lot of discussion at the beginning. Should we change to a Jotun system? We don't know. They'd gone with a competitor of ours beforehand. And it took a lot to win those vessels. So when you've been in there from the very beginning of the first talks with potentially a skeptical customer, someone who doesn't know Jotun, an owner's rep who is kind of umming and ahhing, to then seeing them, at the very end, the decisions have been made. You've delivered on your promises. The coating's been carried out and the scaffolding's coming down and it's been delivered and it's floating. You're like, wow, I was the major driver for this from the very beginning. And I think whoever's been in that position, whether it's coatings or whether it's a completely different industry, you're going to feel a certain level of pride. And we actually got to, we were doing a marketing push behind that particular vessel. And we were on a small little dinghy in front of this huge monster yacht, sailing down the Elbe towards the North Sea. And we were just a speck in front of it. But, you were so involved in that from the very beginning to it being launched and sailing towards, picking up its owner in Norway. You were thinking, fantastic, you've done well here. You need to carry on and deliver on this more often. So yeah, it was a massive driver.
Yeah, it's seeing it does, like you said, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you've been with something from the beginning and then you see the actual end point of it. I mean, if I relate that to perhaps recruitment, it's when you place somebody into a brand new client. And for us, the end point is when the candidate that you place comes to you as a client and says, hey, can you help me build my team? And I think that's when you start to see it as the full cycle. And I think it's when you do, you see it from beginning to end. It's the most satisfying thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, not only for you as an individual, but for your team, for your company, for who you represent. It's lovely. It's lovely to see. And, humans are built that way. We like to see the end result and the fruits of our labors. throughout history, that's always been a massive driver, and it's certainly a big ambition of mine. As I said earlier, I like to be there from the beginning, and that's what the coatings industry is, if you like. It's building up those layers and those coats of productivity and progress to the end goal. So, that's been, whether it's been my career or whether it's been, as you just said, projects from the beginning to the end, or whether it's how I do business. I like to be involved from the beginning to the end, and that's provided in this industry and quite a high level.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously, I can just tell by talking to you that the job satisfaction you get from doing well and providing your customers with a great end result, means everything to you. It's driving you in everything you do. It
does. It has to. Otherwise, as I said, you're going to lose that business. It has to be the main driver.
Amazing. Okay. So, I think having listened, I know that you've listened to my previous episodes. I think which part of the, and probably from my smile that you can see, which part of the episode is coming up. It's the quick fire would you rather questions. Are you ready?
Let's do it. Let's go for it.
Let's go for it. Okay, George. Start quite safe, always. Would you rather have your current job that you're in now for the next year at double your salary, or have a year off completely on your current pay?
It's tempting, but I'd have to go for option one, because I think that, although it shouldn't work, does play a large role in my everyday life. I've got a young family. I've got a fantastically supportive wife at home. And I think, I have to have that get up and go. I have to wake up in the mornings with a purpose to get out of bed and give it my all. And I think, just to have 2 years off or a year off on full pay would be lovely. And I'd probably do a lot with it. But, you've got to have, for me anyway, the major driver has to be business, and to have that job and to earn your coming home to the family at the end of the evening.
Yeah. And the novelty, I think, would wear off quite quick on that, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And I'm not one for sitting around. I can't do it. If I had a year off, I think I'd probably travel and do double the amount of running I'm already doing, and do all the stuff that I'd like to do on the weekends, but never actually have time for. But as you said, that would be a few weekends, and then you'd be like, I'm kind of done with this now. I want my routine back.
Yeah, absolutely. You'd be knocking on Jotun's door, giving them their double payback.
Yeah, you would. Absolutely. Well, probably not that. I wouldn't go that far, but.
Awesome. So, being British but living in Germany, the ultimate question: the Premier League or the Bundesliga?
Oh, Premier League.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big football fan, and I'm an Arsenal boy. My family are from North London originally. Yeah, sorry, I don't know who you support, Holly.
I'm a Chelsea girl.
Okay, fair enough. Right, yeah.
I might not have invited you on if I don't know.
No, but listen, I mean, we're big Arsenal fans. My brother and my uncles. So it's always been the Premier League for me. And actually, the team that I support in Germany are HSV, Hamburger Sportverein. Okay. And I follow them very closely. And we've actually got some VIP seats through the company with them, which we take very high end clients to, which is always fun. But they're in the Zweites Bundesliga. They're not even in the Bundesliga. So I don't follow the Bundesliga as closely as I would now, because of the second division position of HSV, unfortunately.
Oh, right. Okay. Interesting. And another English-German reference, fish and chips or a bratwurst?
Well, I don't eat meat, to be honest with you. So it has to be fish and chips. And it was always going to be fish and chips. Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, fish and chips always on a Friday night, really? Before the weekend. So we used to have fish and chips back then, and it's kind of, and mushy peas. So it's always going to be fish and chips. I mean, listen, bratwurst are nice, and you can have them now and again, but yeah, fish and chips all the way.
Fish and chips wins.
Yeah.
And the final question, is there one quote, sort of motivational quote, that sort of drives you every day, or that you strive to live by?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big one for quotes, to be honest, but there's certain things that I live by. I think the first one my mum and dad probably installed in me when I was a kid was, there's no time like the present. That get up and go, Don't waste opportunities and don't waste too much time. And interlinking kind of saying more than a quote from that is, I think, Richard Branson said this in some of his kind of overviews of business, is say yes to the opportunity and work out how to do it on the way there. So, if don't doubt yourself, if you're not massively knowledgeable of an opportunity, work out, but say yes first. Close the opportunity, so you can get round a table with certain people so you can have a chat. And then if you're not massively knowledgeable, talk to people who are, get the expertise, bring them with you to that meeting. If you're lacking in competency, make sure you've got that competency gap closed before you meet people. But, say yes to the opportunity. Not always, but it's certainly something that I've always kind of lived from. And I think that, is quite interlinking with certainly what we just said as, get up and go and no time like the present.
Yeah. And I think that just shows that you're naturally opportunistic, but you're also, you like having good problems to solve.
Absolutely. I thrive under pressure. I thrive under constructive pressure. And I think in a sick way, I kind of enjoy it. It's not something that everyone's cup of tea. And I don't like being under, extreme amount of pressure to the point where it's affecting my home life or anything like that. But there's always got to be a driving factor, whether that's something positive or whether that's a challenge which I've got to overcome or find a solution to. I kind of definitely need a challenge in the background, because a mundane, everyday, run-of-the-mill job is probably something that wouldn't be for me, I'd have to say. Yeah.
That your ambition and drive and everything just absolutely shines through, so I can tell that for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking to me, George. And I hope we've gone some way to raising awareness and educating on how interesting, how exciting the coatings part of the marine industry really is. But thank you for your time.
Holly, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you as well for having me on. And
no worries.
I hope so too. I hope it's at least shone a little bit of light onto the industry and the workings behind, building these amazing, amazing vessels that we get to work on every day. So thank you as well.
Brilliant. Well, I'll hope to see you soon, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, all the best. Take care.
Cheers, George. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, then it would be awesome if you could leave a rating or a review. Don't forget to subscribe so you can listen to us again. See you soon.